What made it fall apart was there was nothing.
The anemone tendrils you see in the test really just are Sully's hair. The hairs are fatter, they're a different color, they're tapered at the end, and they're being pulled up instead of pushed down by gravity, and they're waving around. Other than that, it's really just hair. The final anemone was much more complicated than that. Each tendril is really a cloth sac. There's a lot more control over how they move, and of course they look completely different. The tendrils getting out of the way of the little ball as it goes through is an automatic thing. Nobody had to animate that. The simulation just does that. Most of the time, once you get it set up, that works pretty well, but sometimes, well, I really don't want this tendril here, I have to get out of the way.
There were definitely some situations where the tendrils around the characters didn't do the right thing just out of the simulation. So Cameron Miyazaki, one of our new guys, we gave him the challenge of animating the tendrils. He animated them and beautifully well, and that's what you see in the film today. 99% simulation and 1% animation.
But I ended up thinking it was somewhat symbolic of whatever that little thing is that we all have in our kids that we worry is not up to snuff to manage in the world, whether it's
To light the reef, it takes probably about 10 broad lights, but then when you add the characters, it could take up to 100 or more. There's a key light, which is kind of an overall bright light that determines the direction of the light. There'll be the caustic light, that dancing light on the ground that's coming through the water. There is also a bounce light, usually from the sand. It's kind of a low-level bounce coming back up onto your props and fish. There'll be an overall kind of bluish fill. There's the murk and the fog lights. And when you put all those together, you get this gorgeous looking reef.
No, she's an up-and-coming child actress, very talented.
Back in A Bug's Life, we discovered that presenting nature on screen meant simplification. We went diving, and we discovered that a coral reef could be broken down into 3 simple ideas. Tall vertical things, big flat horizontal things, and round masses. So if you ignore the ground plane and the ceiling that is the ocean surface, you could have a 3-dimensional environment where you had those 3 ideas that you could present to an audience. That was our formula for constructing the coral reef.
My son was about 5, so this would have been about 98, I think. And I had not seen him a lot because of a lot of work on Bug's Life, and so I wanted to spend some time with him. I said, so let's go take a walk. And so my little 5-year-old and we went up, and we were just going to walk down about 2 blocks to the park. And I thought, oh, some father-son time. And I spent the whole walk just going, stay away from the curb. Don't touch that. You don't know where that's been. Oh, careful from that. Oh, there's a car. Oh, be careful of that branch. And I just spent the whole time correcting him and overprotective and making sure he didn't get hurt. And I just remember this other part of myself, watching myself going, you are just losing every opportunity. You're just missing out right now on being present with your son. And I couldn't stop thinking about that. And I thought, geez, here I am just wanting so badly to be a good father, yet I'm not achieving that. And so I thought, what a ironic dilemma. I thought, fear can deny a good father from being one. And that intrigued me. And that became the missing link to putting all the pieces together for what ultimately became Finding. In the middle of writing something in my bedroom, and my wife had the TV on. I just always remember looking at fish and sensing how much light went through them. So that was one of the first things I sort of threw at them. I said, can we make that?
What makes fish look so different from just a piece of plastic, basically, is that there's several layers working together with light to create this look.
And for a long time, we didn't have a word for it, a phrase for it. And finally, I was just like, well, it's like gummy bears. It's like when you put the gummy bears, you can hold the light. And so it ended up becoming the catchphrase. We just call it the gummy effect.
Father and Nemo, their illumination is probably 80% this gummy substance in them, and then we just augment with surface lighting to get it to look like, they've got some sort of surface on top of all that so you can read their face. Because if they're too gummy, then you can't see any detail, you can't read any expression. So it's like finding that right balance to get them to look like they're both glowy and readable at the same time.
An important feeling of underwater, especially like World War II ships that end up at the bottom of the ocean, is that they rest and they decay. Smacking in of a huge great white shark into a door would release a bunch of sort of rust particles, silt, which had settled onto that stuff, would get knocked up, and the water would get a lot murkier locally in the area, and then you see the silt kind of puff up and then settle back out. The key thing about doing silts and making it believable really has to do not so much with how it gets kicked up. Dust also responds on top of your refrigerator. You smack top of the fridge, dust will kick up in the air. It has to do with how it settles out. And things slow down a lot faster in water. Water is way more viscous than air, as people know. And so when Bruce the shark knocks silt off a door or off the ground or something, as it is ejected into the water around him, it sort of flies in quickly, but then immediately slows down, is eased out by the water, and then gently settles out due to gravity. But once it's in the air, Bruce's tail then sort of swims by and kicks it. It all has to react to that as well. Keeping track of all those dynamic interactions underwater is quite difficult to do. We spent a lot of time and attention to make that look believable. And when it's done right in a shot, suddenly that adds a whole different additional level of believability to being underwater, which is a key story point in the film.
So we don't need them. Yeah, not here.
Place for potential gags and entertainment and just odd juxtapositions of things that could just keep.
What did you think when you found out that a character had been named after you?
I think it's great. It's a little bit of a mixed bag because she's kind of is it the word villain? I have played a million practical jokes on Mr. Andy Stanton, and I think it's just his way of getting me back.
With a bioluminescent fluid that glows in the dark and it attracts others. These 3 tiki heads are actual caricatures of Pixar employees.
Andrew was very clear that he wanted this shot like we've never done before at Pixar. So we used an extremely wide lens, which allowed us to get the camera really close to everything in the tank. And we're moving incredibly fast through a very small space, hitting very specific visual marks to tie in with his story. From a lighting perspective, the shot also presents a difficult challenge insofar as there are setups for inside the tank clean, inside the tank with algae, outside the tank in the air, outside the tank in the baggie moving, indoors and outdoors in several sets.
We used a tool called Pisces, which simulates the behavior of the fish. We would set up a bunch of basic parameters where the school would be, how fast they should swim, and then simulate and do iterations of that until we got something we liked. The number of fish that we would simulate would vary from 5 for a little small school in the reef to a couple thousand for some of the big hero schools and background schools. There was a lot of simulations where we would put a lot of fish in and then just kill the ones that were misbehaving. So basically, hundreds of CG fish died to make this movie.
That way.
Just from an imagery standpoint, you wanted to put it in the movie, and then, of course, you'd like it to ground it a little bit more, and then it became like, geez, if you could make that shape, what if you could make any shape? And then the whole charades thing just sort of...
That way.
Just from an imagery standpoint, you wanted to put it in the movie, and then, of course, you'd like it to ground it a little bit more, and then it became like, geez, if you could make that shape, what if you could make any shape? And then the whole charades thing just sort of... This moment here.
Nice French.
Well, we needed to figure out how Jellyfish moved for one, and that was kind of what this was all about. And this was also to figure out give them something to figure out all of the dynamics down below with.
We began by taking simple spheres as stand-ins for jellyfish and sprinkling them in the volume and pointing a camera that direction. We had no idea how complicated the path was going to be from that attempt at a simplistic view of the set to fully realizing the set with all the jellies moving all different directions, the camera flying through that in 3 dimensions, with no reference for ground plane, ceiling, or walls, the characters interacting with the jellies being see-through, and the whole thing together became quite a mess to untangle.
Quite a Pandora's box, this little guy right here. But it was worth it because it's beautiful in the film. It's a beautiful.
One of the most important elements to make the tank look believable in the set that it was in was the use of reflections and refractions, looking from outside in and inside back out. Took both videotape footage, stuck our heads in tanks, stuck our heads outside tanks, and stared at the fish in the tank bed downstairs to really get a sense for how the image gets warped and distorted by the glass and water interface. The effect itself, the physics are well understood. To do it in computer graphics cheaply is hard, and especially to cheat it so we can control it, which is one of the key things about it. And so we weren't able to just duplicate physics directly. We need to put controls into adjust it and fudge.
We are lost. Can you give us directions?
There. That should do it. And I just realized that we're being videotaped now. So, and when I say we, I mean me. So this is perfect.
And we had Marlon's character just kind of hanging out in the middle of this big blue void, and this whale slowly comes out of the murk and approaches him from behind, and it makes this big scale adjustment. We actually decided that that was the way to play this gag at the end of the whale approaching.
For the longest time, it was coming at them. We established it so it was coming from the front, and we finally thought, my God, it was working so well in that test. Let's just do that.
And for you geeks, if you see our first trailer, you actually see shots of the whale approaching from the front, because we actually made that decision after we cut our first trailer.
I hope somebody lost their job over that.
Inside the whale.
Sort of spreads on the top, and it's like you didn't even ask for that, and you can just tell they're just so invested.
The moment we tried to make this moment of Dory swimming down to Father feel very similar when she first swims down to help him at the beginning, and we literally used the exact same dialogue.
Really amazing shot that one of our technical directors, Martin Wing, did as a test, just to show us how water could come off the tongue. But originally, we wanted it to dialogue as a Pelican.
I found his dad!
In a big action scene like this Pelican sequence, we'll oftentimes build much more footage than we'll end up using in the final film.
I think this was 3 to 1, approximately, for footage that we created and then the shots that were actually used in the final film.
What we actually did in the scene is, we knew the basic action that needed to happen. Nigel needs to take off with Father and Dory in his beak, swoop into the water, and then fly around being chased by the seagulls. And what we did was we basically blocked out that entire action flying around the harbor and then filmed it lots of different ways. Big wide shots, tracking shots, shots moving through the air, shots locked on the ground, panning, seeing them go by. And we just really went to town building a huge amount of footage. And then we found the final scene in the editing room.
Decided to do was to establish a range of underwater color to track the characters through the film. So with the reef, we start with crystal clear, kind of very light greenish turquoise, And as the film progresses, it gets darker green, turquoise, and then black, and then blue. And then as we get closer to Sydney Harbor, it becomes greener. The pastels are used to kind of outline the color and the mood and the lighting for the entire film.
We broke it out into like what we call hero shots and crowd shots. Justin and the whole crowd group would get together and they would do the huge crowds of fish when wiping the net or in the net. Most of the close-up shots were hand animated.
The net itself, though, is in some shots hero because we couldn't get that kind of close connection between net and fish without animating by hand. But in far shots, it's done simulated. But of course, the simulator doesn't do it all exactly right. Some fish have the tail sticking out, some fish get stuck outside the net and want to go back in, which is, of course, completely insane. So you have to kill those fish and cripple the other fish off to make them fit inside the net shape. And there was a whole team of folks who had to work on that stuff with animators to make sure that the amount of activity of the fish, how anxious they were in the scene, how organized or chaotic they were, is all controlled through the scene across all those.
And usually we have a big, hurrah with horns and mariachi bands and everybody just cheering and parading. And since it was just